Hello everyone. Welcome to another class, Wednesday night. My honor to be leading this class for over 3 decades now. And it's dedicated to my dear new grandson, Yonah Mordechai, whose bris was this past Sunday. Yonah Mordechai Jacobson, the son of my eldest son, Menachem Mendel, and his dear wife, Dvorah. So I dedicate this class in honor of the newborn. I've been thinking a lot about the issues of duality, seamlessness. In general, it captures so much of life's challenges. You know, the different breaches, betrayals, disappointments. You know, we begin off with a certain sense of idealism in our lives, our hopes, that everything will go smoothly. And then things begin to crack. A little crack here, a little schism here, a breach there, a betrayal here. And at some point, our psyches and our beings become fragmented, splintered into many parts. And in many ways, that captures life itself. The pain that causes, and of course, our search and our seeking out to try to bridge and to try to reconnect fragmented components, fragmented elements of our lives. But thinking particularly, because this coming Sunday, actually Shabbat, and then Sunday, is the beginning of the 3-week period of mourning, the saddest time in the Jewish calendar. And it's marked by the 17th of Tammuz, which, as I said, is Shabbos. But because it's Shabbat, it's not a fast day, so the fast day is pushed off till Sunday. That's if Mashiach doesn't come in between. And it continues for 3 weeks, exactly 3 weeks, and concludes on Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Av, which will also be Shabbat. And because of Shabbos, it's again pushed off to Sunday. And what marks the 17th of Tammuz? What happened in the beginning of these 3 weeks? The 9th of Av, we understand. That was the burning down of the temple, the first temple and the second temple, exactly on the same day, 490 years apart. The first temple, which stood for 410 years. Then there was a 70-year period after it was destroyed, and the second temple, which stood for 420 years. So basically, from the time of the destruction of the temple, first temple, the time of the second was 490 years, almost 500 years. And that is clearly a destructive day, a challenging day, a terrible, horrible day. But what about the 17th of Tammuz, this weekend? What marks that day? So the Talmud tells us that this is the day, the Hufka Ir, the city of Jerusalem, which was surrounded and basically assaulted by the Babylonians and later by the Romans. On this day, the 17th of Tammuz, in some opinions, both temples, they breached the wall. The wall, Jerusalem has a wall around it, they breached the wall. They didn't yet destroy the temple, but breaching the wall was essentially the beginning of the end. And the beginning of the end because they broke the wall down, and then began the conquest of Jerusalem, and finally 3 weeks later the destruction of the temple. What is the significance of this breaking of the wall? Judaism, despite its so-called historical element, and sometimes on a very ostensible level seems to be very basic. Jews left Egypt. We celebrated the Hanukkah when they rededicated the temple. Purim was the saving of the Jews from Haman and Achashverosh and the decree. But when you look a little deeper, you find that the themes capture and reflect fundamental, universal themes that are timeless. And this 17th day of Tammuz, the breach of the wall, is essentially the cracks, the schisms that I was talking about. So it isn't just some type of technical matter, they happen to breach the wall. It reflects the breach all of us experience. And hence the topic for this class is the crack in your psyche, the breach in your psyche. When was dissonance born? So really, it's a psychological and emotional and spiritual, you could just say human condition, the breaches of our lives. That's what we will address. Both their significance, where they come from, their roots, and of course, how to heal and how to mend the fractures, whatever that fracture, how it manifests in our lives. But understanding it well, and not just through symptomatic medicine. We just deal with a symptom, a Band-Aid here, a aspirin there, a Tylenol here, Advil there. But rather getting to the root. So to get into the root and remedial medicine, in the sense of preventive medicine, the best thing is to get to the root of where these cracks come from in the first place. And that's what we have to discuss and understand. I was also listening to a Yale professor, Paul Bloom, I believe, who Professor Paul Bloom, a psychologist, a neuroscientist at Yale, is one of these online classes, and talking about the concept of duality versus materialism in understanding the human mind. Of course, he brings from René Descartes, where he discusses the idea that the mind is separate from the body, with the different proofs. And he in turn presents, Professor Bloom, that is a form of duality, because then we have a body and we have a mind or a spirit beyond the body. Whereas the so-called materialistic definition is that the mind is simply a series of neurons. Let's just read to you a very interesting way he describes it. He quotes the biologist Francis Crick, describing the astonishing hypothesis. You, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. As Lewis Carroll's Alice might have phrased it, you're nothing but a pack of neurons. And he goes on to explain that this, of course, smacks directly, diametrically opposed to Descartes should be the way we pronounce it, theory about I am, I think, therefore I am, the whole idea of the thought and the mind being separate from the body. But what struck me was that he was calling that duality, and in a sense this materialistic view that we are simply just a machine with complex neurons, as being oneness, struck me as quite ironic, because especially when you think about in Jewish thought, you have the concept of Hashem Echad, oneness, unity, and everything is about finding that seamlessness, the opposite of duality. And yet this materialistic view is so counter the concept of a soul, of a spirit, of love. Everything gets down to some mathematical equation that we're essentially sophisticated robots, and of free will, and all our personal lives essentially become mechanical. That to the extent that this that Professor Bloom himself at the end says that many people reject the scientific view because they can't deal with that mechanical side of it. On the other, some embrace it and reject all humanism basically as being an illusion, love and love of our children, love of each other, and so on, God, spirituality. And then he says that you also have the option of trying to reconcile. So I was thinking about it as well in the context of breaches and unity and division and so on, how we look at our lives. And I will address this. I'll also be addressing it. I have a Sunday night broadcast called My Life, Chassidus Applied, every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., which you can also tune into. I'll be discussing this as well. So I just wanted to throw that into the whole pile of this discussion and try to address the concept of duality and materialism and so-called a unified field theory that encompasses all the elements of life. Yes, it is maybe attractive, though non-romantic, to embrace the idea that there's nothing more than the rules of a machine, and that we do not have necessarily a spirit and a soul and so on. The fact of the matter is, I'm not going to go prove right now one way or the other. I believe in experiential proof. Just like music touches you, not because someone can prove it, but because it just does. Even though someone can quantify it to some illusion, manipulation of your brain, manipulation of your neurons, but music touches us to the point that we feel something. It can affect our lives, transform our lives. The same with love, the same with children, the same with many of the truths that we embrace, our values and so on. So here's not a place and not a time, it's not my style to go into a scientific debate which could probably go nowhere or be endless, because for every argument there's a counter-argument, but rather go with not a gut instinct, but a essential sense that we are more than just robots, and that our choices do matter, and that moral choices, value systems, love, and pain and loss are real. And that when, God forbid, there's an accident, that someone that you love is hurt, or any innocent person, it's not just that your neurons are going through motion and dismissing it as some type of mechanization, a mechanical process, that if you were able to just embrace the mechanics of it, you no longer would have to deal with grief and pain and loss, and for that matter, love and joy and pleasure and so on. So with that in mind, if you do take a very mechanical approach, yeah, you could chalk it up to a very unified field. Why? Because everything is mechanical. There is no second reality. As Descartes would argue. At the same time, and this is a critical component, there's a fascinating Igeres HaKodesh letter that the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Chassidus, wrote close to the time of his passing, where he explains that the mere fact that the yesh, which is the sense of identity of existence that we are, each of us, is so self-contained to the point that we feel that we don't have a beginning, and nothing, we don't have a source, even though our minds tell us we have parents or whatever it may be, we sense a type of being self-created. We don't feel we are an extension of something else or something before us. We don't feel we have a beginning and an end. That comes, he says, not from a distorted version or a distorted view or perception. It comes from Atzmos, what he calls, the core essence of the divine itself, who has no cause that caused him. And he implanted that type of causelessness, sense of causelessness in our own reality. So it's no surprise, therefore, that we can have a type of sense that everything is right here. And we're not part of a process, a result of spiritual evolution or higher levels of consciousness and so on. We are self-contained because we connected to that self-contained element of Atzmos. The difference is that that's God, and God therefore is truly causeless, which means it has no cause, and essentially is his own cause because it's his own reality. But he imparted that aspect, and I say he, just as a matter of habit, God, the essence of the divine, imparted that within us, that we also have a sense of that. Which to me really gives an explanation essentially to agnosticism and atheism, to the conviction that so many scientists have that may go exactly that. There is no duality. Everything is here. And everything is mechanical. That's how I would explain this from a divine perspective. However, what we have to do is be wise and understand that we could not have done this on our own. That itself had to come from somewhere. So as much as in our feelings we feel we're self-contained and self-made for that matter, the fact of the matter is there's another dimension to us that does sense the other, that does sense a matter of selflessness and does sense a soul. This would be pure body. So strangely and ironically, it's the divine essence that actually gives the body such credence that you can actually go to a material approach to life and not see any duality. When in truth that's coming from the highest possible reality, which is the divine. You could say it's even beyond so-called unity. But at the same time, we do have another part to our lives. We all know we have another voice. In addition to the voice of survival, which we'll call the voice of the material voice of survival existing, we also have a transcendent voice that searches something. We're seekers. We are restless. And for anyone to deny that that's part of our reality, just like the reality of eating and sleeping and drinking and taking care of our selfish needs, is, I would submit, is themselves in a denial. Human beings are by nature restless, and that distinguishes us fundamentally from animals and others. So you can chalk it up to neurons. But why are the neurons by us that way, and why isn't it that way in an animal? Why can an animal, a behemoth, a cow, graze in the field day in, day out, without any neurosis, without any angst, and without any sense of needing to grow or change its habitat, or develop its life, or develop its potential? So if you could chalk it up to neurons, but there is another voice, and that's the real challenge that Hasidic thought has to deal with. That we see a duality simply in our own realities. The voices, the different voices that draw us, the different forces that define our lives. In general terms, the two forces. One, the voice of survival, making ends meet, paying our bills, eating, sleeping, drinking, taking care of our physical needs, grooming. And the transcendental voice, the need to go beyond, which some of us satisfy through travel and art and music, through sexuality, romance, some through religion and spirituality. The need to find out what else is out there. The drive that caused NASA and different space competition, different countries, to spend billions, if not trillions of dollars to find out what's out there. The ability for us to look up to the heavens and say, something is there. We want to know what it is. Curiosity. Something you don't find in any other species. So there you have another voice. How do we deal with these two? So you can dismiss that, and here are the options. You can dismiss that spiritual as being an illusion, as the materialists would argue, and it's all part of the neurons, you could say the matrix that has convinced us that it's real, and love, and transcendence, and the divine, and the spiritual, and God. But it's all really just mechanical. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that there is true duality. There's two realities. And there's a fragmented life. Or, and this is where Hasidus, especially Hasidus Chabad, comes into the picture and says, no. This duality is true because God, the divine itself, created two tracks, two paths. For us to go ahead and then join them and fuse them together. So matter and energy are reversible. E equals mc squared. But in our reality, they can take on two different shapes and forms. And the same thing, so many areas of our lives take on shapes and forms, that we have a diverse world, a world of multitude, myriad of different species, of different cells, almost endless, infinite division. And yet there's some type of force that, as divided as the world may be, whether it's in nature or your human body, it works together in some symbiotic harmony, some synthesis. So you see here a third option. You could say it's all materialistic, or you could say it's all spiritual, or you could say there's a duality. I'm actually adding a fourth one. Or you could say there's really a unity that connects it all, and that unity is beyond soul and body, and that's why it can connect these two realities. So that's where I would oppose with that, Professor Bloom. There's another approach. Descartes, I'm not going to go into his philosophy. I'm not sure exactly what his conclusion would have been. Fine, he said there's a duality, there's the body, there's the mind. And he had these different proofs for that, how a human being can go beyond just the mechanics, and so on and so forth. Then there's those that argue with that and say, no, that can be explained in neurons and mathematical equations and algorithms, and comes down to explaining it all in a context of mechanics and so on. So that's two schools of thought, but there's another school of thought. That there's another way to achieve unity, not by turning it all into mechanics, but by turning to a place that's in the divine, that's beyond the mechanics, beyond the soul, and beyond any form of duality. And that level is not just beyond duality, it's beyond duality. It can create two tracks or more, and then show us how we can come and join them all together. So you can have a soul and a mind and a body. You don't have to chalk it all up to neurons, and still won't be duality ultimately. It'll ultimately be an ultimate unity. So we're not dismissing the diversity of existence. We're not dismissing the unifying elements. We're going to a place that's beyond unity and beyond diversity, and therefore they could all be joined. Now I know this may be a heavy concept, but I wanted to introduce it right at the outset. And let's now go back a more personal level and applying it to our personal psychological lives. So when we look at children, you look at birth, there's a seamlessness to every child. You can call it simplistic, but a child is still diverse, has different systems, but their psyche is very much focused. There isn't yet what we would call duality or duplicity. The dissonance that we adults experience, wherever it begins, when it's the first time you lie, you learn from adults to lie, or you seem to feel that you can do that to get away with it, which is usually copying people around us. We're not born with that dissonance. We're born with a sense of harmony. And then we begin to experience the breaks. First time we're lied to, the first time we have experience a disappointment, and other similar experiences, a broken promise, broken dream, a love lost, a betrayal, an abandonment. And this takes on for each of us different ways. Some people unfortunately experience this far too young, even though frankly it's always far too young, but some really young in their childhood, broken families, abandoned parents who abandon children, divorce, ugly divorce, dysfunctionality, abuse. These are all breaks. These are all taking the peace and harmony that a child has in its home, and a crack, a puncture, something breaks, and it hurts. We may get used to it, but that doesn't make it better. It just means we get accustomed to the cracks in our lives. So then, when you look at it that way, the key is to remember that's not our natural state to have the cracks and to adjust to them. We'll soon discuss that more at length. It's our natural state is the way we were born. I mentioned this a number of times. John Bradshaw, one of the early proponents of the inner child, himself a pastor, a son of a father alcoholic, and wrote in the early 70s and later many books and had workshops on the concept of where we begin and how we go off in life, and the shame that he talks about that develops due to our own breaks in our lives. In his case, an alcoholic father that he had to always keep as a secret. Did not have his other friends come to his house, always had lies, excuses. The great shame of a father that was out of control. We all have elements of this, some of it more extreme, some of it more subtle. But I remember a workshop he did that I'll never forget, because it captures so the resonance of an intimacy, of unity, that it just was extremely powerful. I saw it in a video years ago. He was running a workshop with a group of maybe 50 people, men and women, and in the background there was music playing, sound playing. Initially you don't know what it is, but then you realize it's the heartbeat. So think of an amplified heartbeat. Boom, 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 boom. Slower probably. Very soothing in a way. Very pulsating, very rhythmic, and a type of calm that it creates when you begin to get used to it. And then John Bradshaw begins to speak. People's eyes are closed. He begins to describe, he says, this is the sound of your mother's heartbeat while you're in your mother's womb for 9 months. So what does your child hear? I'm sure it hears other swishes and sounds, but the heartbeat is a constant background music for a child for 9 months. It's right near the heart. So it hears, not necessarily very loud, but very calming. That's what a child hears. And he begins to speak, he says, so I am now, as your mother, speaking to the child within me and saying, I am so blessed to have you, my dear child, inside of me. I'm nurturing you, I'm feeding you. I cannot wait for the day will come when you're ready to emerge. And know, I bought for you a special set of clothing. I prepared a beautiful white linen bed, crib, bassinet. I will always take care of you. I'll keep you warm. I'll keep you nourished, keep you nurtured. Should there ever be anything in life that challenges you, always know you have me. So imagine this is John Bradshaw speaking, everyone's hearing the heartbeat, and everyone's turning back into that child listening to these words. The place began to cry, and so did I. It was so moving. It so resonated. And this goes on a few minutes, and then people start, after he finishes, it says, then people open their eyes. Why are they crying? Because it resonates as truth. And if you didn't have it, it's something you all recognize we should have had. Having a mother like that. What you find from that, this is the antithesis of dissonance. This is harmony. And the heartbeat just captures it so beautifully. That sound, that rhythmic sound, that balanced sound. Yes, it goes back and forth, like a pulse, a heart. But it's calming. And you hear love, and the mere fact that you're 9 months in that type of state, the psyche develops a very comfortable and secure place. Now, here of course is where it gets sad. The child is born. You cut the umbilical cord. You're no longer in that comfortable place. Your mother may still clutch you and put you close to her chest, and you may still hear the heart, but now you're a separate entity. So if the parent, the mother and father create a continued environment of that type of embryonic fluid immersion, like being underwater, and you continue to feel the love pouring all over you, you continue to feel completely encompassed by the love of your parents, the nurturing, the validation, the confidence, then that sense of harmony continues. But the moment that it comes where you begin to feel the break, suddenly you're now separate of your parents, separate of those around you, and sometimes even begin to become separate from yourself. Where you can say, I betrayed myself, in a sense, I've lost myself. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. And it usually doesn't even happen in childhood, except if there are traumatic or severe experiences. But this is the anatomy, dissecting the anatomy of how harmony turns into dissonance. And it happens to everyone in our lives when we lose our innocence. You may not be able to identify the moment, but the experience everyone can relate to. And then you're now on the other side of the story. You're now eaten from the tree of knowledge, maybe first subtly, then more extreme. And now we already have duality and duplicity and worse. And that's what we contend with. We contend with it in ourselves and with others. You can smile to someone and really hate them, and ready to stab them in the back, or they can do that same thing to you. And what we have is the world of tension, anxiety, separation, and ultimately loneliness. The breaching of the wall of Jerusalem on the 17th of Tammuz symbolizes this. Because we all have a wall. We all have a protective barriers that protect us, just like the womb when we're in our mother's womb, just like our healthy homes and other nurturing environments. When the wall is breached, when there's a crack in your wall, in your psyche, that's when you begin to experience there's more than one reality. And you begin to have these two voices, the voice of survival, the voice of transcendence, the voice of truth and values, and the voice of survival, which says, you know what? Survival of the fittest, dog eats dog. And the fascinating thing is that this is the way it was meant to be. So despite the fact that the 17th of Tammuz is a sad day, nevertheless, the duality of existence is the way God created it, in a way that you could interpret that there are more than one reality, the spiritual reality and the material reality. As Descartes spelled out, thought, the mind, the soul, and the body. And how others rejected it, where they only went for the body and they turned the soul also into part of a body. Then there's the mystics that do the opposite, that turn the body into an illusion, everything is soul. Bringing us back to what we discussed. And the ultimate goal is not body without soul, not soul without body, and not duality, but a fourth option, that there's a divine force that gives each one their particular track, and then when you access it, you come to a point which creates seamlessness, harmony within the diversity. The repairing of the breach, the repairing of the crack. Now, interestingly, on the 17th of Tammuz, there was another crack. Years earlier, the first sad event that happened on the 17th of Tammuz. Can you guess what it is? As the Mishnah says, 5 sad events. The breaking of the tablets. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, receives the Torah, receives divine blueprint for life, the mandate. Everything seems to be going well. And then a betrayal, another crack, another breach. The Jewish people build a golden calf. Moses comes down, God says to him, go down, something's happening. He goes down from the mountain, and what does he see? He sees them celebrating a golden calf, an idol. He proceeds to shatter the tablets. This is on the 17th of Tammuz, which is exactly 40 days from Shavuos, from the holiday of Shavuos, Vav 6th of Sivan. Then, of course, the story continues. He goes back up on the mountain and prays for forgiveness for them. That doesn't help for 40 days, and then goes another 40 days that ends with Yom Kippur, when he comes back with what? A new set of tablets has been repaired. But the old tablets, the first tablets, I should say, that were cracked, are not discarded. They remain in the ark forever, the Shivrei Haluchas, the broken tablets. Because there's the break and there's the repairing of the break. And so again, years later, this time is the wall around Jerusalem. But they all symbolize the cracks of our own personal lives. So the fact is, we all will have cracks. And yes, it's a sad day when there's a crack. It's a fast day. It's a day to grieve. But we don't stop by grieving. We continue to build. And we believe in building the second temple. And then that breaks, and we build the third temple, which will be forever in the future, the near future. So there's no such thing as stopping with a break. Yes, there's a break. We all go through life. Everyone's umbilical cord will be cut more than once. Once physically, other times metaphorically. We will all experience some form of betrayal, some disappointment, some fragmentation, some splintering. The question is what we do after that. We can lay down and die, God forbid. We can just become wounded and broken hearts and souls, literally broken hearts and souls, where we feel, I'm damaged goods. You can go into denial and make believe it never happened, even though you are that way. Or you can figure out how you take the pain, how you take the break, the split, splinter, the crack, and turn it into an asset that helps you find deeper ways of connecting. Because duality and duplicity can be turned into diversity, and diversity can be turned into harmony. So if you only had seamlessness initially and never had a break, you may not have life's challenges, but you don't have the depth of harmony that can be created in a world of chaos, which essentially is the world in which we live, a world where there are the splits. So we each have that crack in our psyche, or more than one, and this weekend, this 3 weeks, it comes to teach us how to look at it, where is it rooted from, how did it develop and its consequences, and how to go back. But not go back to square one. It's going back now with a knowledge. Hemingway said, life breaks all people, and some are stronger in the broken places. He wasn't one of those someones. He proceeded to commit suicide due to his own challenges. But he's absolutely right. Life does break, and some are stronger, and that's our choice. Why? Because we could go to a deeper place that's beyond splintering, beyond fragmentation, and beyond duality, and beyond oneness. That even in a place where there is a true crack, you can come to correct it and repair it to the point that it becomes complete seamlessness. The fourth option, as I mentioned before. So to go back now to the theme of the mind, Professor Bloom's talk, and the prevalent theory, as he puts it, so many that chalk up everything down to a bunch of machinery and a bunch of equations and neurons. Not to take away from its sophistication. But yes, you can go with that theory, but that's an escapism theory. I would say it's even the easy way out. It's basically just putting back everything into an equation. Instead of having the courage to embrace the nobility, the spirit of the human being, the ability for us to go beyond our nature, beyond ourselves, the restlessness, the soul, and realize that at the end of the day, the soul and the body are not a duality. There is something greater than both, because that's exactly the way the divine plan was, that there would be two. And it would give us the impression and can give us the possible distortion that these are two separate tracks that don't communicate with each other. And then come to realize they're not. They're two voices of one higher reality, and both are necessary. So God created day one, light. Day two, separation between the higher and the lower. And day three, Tiferes, harmony within diversity. Beauty is never one color. It's never one hue, never one sound. It's harmony amidst diversity. Take the human body with all its different functions and systems and cells. But there's a healthy body has some type of unifying force. Same thing in nature. And that's the beauty, to have different colors, different musical notes, and let them all play in the right order. Then you have something that's beautiful. That could only happen in a world where there's diversity and potential conflict. Potential. So you have two choices. You could say, 1 second, if there was no two, it was only everything was one cell, one color, there can never be conflict. You're right, there can never be conflict, but there can never be beauty. There can never be that deeper dimension that comes specifically from a crack and a split. So we need everything. We need to know that there is the mechanical body part. We need to know there's the soul dimension. We need to know that they initially can seem as duality, and then we need to come to realize they're not. Because there's a force that's beyond both, that does not contradict both. And that's ultimately what our mind leads us. When you study Hasidic thought, for example, especially, I've been teaching Ayin Beis, it's another class I give every day, it's also posted on YouTube. He talks about this journey from a fragmented reality to the mind, but then takes the mind to the unconscious mind, and then says the unconscious mind is not even a mind. It's really pleasure, and it's ultimately divine pleasure. You see what's going on here? That initially there's body and soul, there's mind and body, then the mind takes you to a place that's beyond the mind, to the point that the mind is not really mind, it's really a divine force called pleasure that manifests in the mind, what we call intellect. We have to be humble and realize that the mind is one tool. And yes, that has a mechanical side to it. Because you can say at the end of the day, even the soul is mechanics. It could become semantics. The fact that some scientists call it the materialism and Descartes called it the duality, you could argue, you know what? Even according to Descartes, what do you mean duality? It's different than, let's say, the mechanics of material world, but it has its own mechanics, its own spiritual mechanics. So we're back to that. It's on a more sublime level. The answer is no. All this is rooted in a far higher place that is neither mechanical nor non-mechanical. It's neither soul nor body. And that's ultimately where we reach when we come to a point where we go beyond the cracks. And interestingly, if we didn't have the crack, we probably would never come to that realization. Because then you'd have your peace. Either you'd live in two universes, body and soul, matter and spirit, matter and energy, or you don't. But the crack forces us, if we're productive and healthy about it, to go deeper into the whole reality and picture of things. And where does it take us? To a place that's beyond cracks. That's beyond the state that was preceding the crack. In the language of the Kabbalah, it works like this. The Eitz Chaim says it eloquently. Initially, and this is not in time, conceptually, the divine infinite light filled everything. What means mitzias? Filled everything that would ever be. Think of it that way. A state of utter seamlessness. Divine seamlessness. Not even an embryo in a womb, but just a womb itself, the divine womb. Can't even call it a womb, but that's just for metaphorical purposes I'm using that. But in this reality, nothing else can be, because this is a completely all-consuming, indivisible, omnipresent state of divine consciousness. And I want to just distinguish, it doesn't mean consciousness as we know it, I'm just using the term. Think of something that's completely no other. There is only one, the entity itself, no room for another. So then, of course, they couldn't be in existence like us, because we who have a dependent consciousness and dependent reality simply cannot exist. That seamless whole can envision us, can will us and desire us, but its intensity completely encompasses even that which it envisions. Comes the Arizal and says, crack number one, the Tzimtzum Harishon, the original primordial black hole, conceals the conscious dimension of that divine state. And now what he calls is a cholul mokampane, a space has been created. Again, not in time, it's conceptual. The concept of space has been created, a space for another. Within it there's a residue, there's an impression of the original so-called light. But now there's room for another. Then comes next, in his terminology, is a kavachut, a line and a thread of light. From the so-called energy and light that was removed from this space, to leave room for another consciousness, comes a ray of consciousness from that state into this now. But now it's preceded by this big black hole and vacuum, and it's a very narrow light. Again, all conceptual. Think of it like a teacher that's infinitely distant from a student, completely concentrates and conceals all his intelligence, so there's silence. Tzimtzum is silence. Think of it a primordial silence. And then slowly enters a thin line that streams in consciousness. And the reality that we know today originates from that. So you have here the seamlessness, beyond anything, only oneness. Then you have the duality, born of the birth of duality, the tzimtzum. And then you have the kav, which begins to give us think of it like a kav, a chut. A chut is actually like a thread. What does a thread do? When you have a rupture in a garment, a tear, the thread comes and connects it together. You sew it together again. So the kav, think of the kav as the needle that threads together the fragments that are possibly a result that are potentially emerge from a concealed state. In a preconcealed, pre-symptom reality and consciousness, there's no room for any duality. Now there is. And now you need the kav, which is like the teferes, the third day, that comes and begins to bring that light. Now, this will manifest, and in Hasidic and Kabbalistic and Hasidic thought discusses the whole process. How many times over the fragmentation will develop. There'll be even the shattering of containers, which is true chaos, a true dissonance. Then there'll be the repair. And then there'll be what we call reality as we know it, a world like ours, which on one hand has the kav's power of unifying, but also has the fragmented elements that come from its tzimtzum. And each one in our microcosmic life, all these levels that we experience. We have the oneness when we're in the mother's womb, the pre-tzimtzum consciousness, sometimes as newborn children as well, you can call that. Then we have when we begin to separate and we sense ourselves as identities separate of our parents. And then we have our education, a healthy education, a nurturing one, a validation and building of self-confidence, where in a fragmented world we begin to connect again, through friends, through parents, through loved ones, through ultimately love. And the same is how the human being was created, interestingly. God says, I create you as one, male and female. You're in the divine image. Then he splits them into two, called the Nesira. Only to find each other again. What's the point? Why split them when you're going to, in the first place? Because that's the purpose of existence. You begin as one, then you can forget. You think you're two different tracks, and then you reunite and realize you're really part of a higher one. But now it's a deeper level. Because within fragmentation, within duality, you found unity. That's a whole different dimension. Because that brings you back to the etzem, to the core, that's higher than the pre-tzimtzum consciousness. The pre-tzimtzum consciousness is a contradiction. Duality, two realities are contradiction to pre-tzimtzum consciousness. That's why the tzimtzum is the one that creates that type of space for another. The kav in its diminished way and its streaming, think of it spoon feeding, begins to reconnect. But what happens at the end? The end you get to a place that's higher than the pre-tzimtzum consciousness, which is the divine essence itself. Now you're ready for that, and then the duality disappears. In a sense, you could say the pre-tzimtzum consciousness can exist in the post-tzimtzum consciousness. But that's only after we do our work of discovering unity in our fragmented lives. So every crack in life is an opportunity. Every breach, every schism is an opening. As our good friend Leonard Cohen says, the crack is to let the light in. But not just light, deeper light, to the point of light that is beyond the crack and beyond the mending, beyond the fusion. So this is how it lays itself out in the cosmic order according to the Arizal's map. And it's a very eloquent way of looking at existence. Despite the pain, you can say in life, are you in the middle of a rupture or are you in the middle of a mending? The 17th of Tammuz symbolizes that in history, and it replays itself each in our own personal lives in our own way, with the goal of building, not to destroying, with the goal of finding a way to go beyond the cracks, as I said, fix them, and not just fix them, but get to a place that was there greater than it was before the crack happened, like the Talmud says, the Jewish law, which is also essentially the concept of appeals. That if somebody has a contract with you, and then that contract is challenged, shtar sheyotza lov irur, and it's upheld in court, you can never challenge it again. So you suddenly see the crack has made the contract stronger once it's upheld. Essentially the idea of appeal, you can appeal once, twice, whenever it is, but at some point you can't, if the Supreme Court, you can't appeal anymore. Now it's become law. You can't change that anymore. So you see suddenly a crack, a challenge. Literally, someone calling this a forged contract or a false contract or a wrong contract, or suddenly the crack is what brings in a deeper dimension of commitment that now can never be challenged again. It's like someone who went through a challenge, now you can trust them. Another person you could say, they're trustworthy, but I don't know what they would do if they had to deal with a real temptation or a real challenge and so on. And that's how it all comes together in that particular sense. So yes, we do have on one hand a world of duality. We have a world also of unity, but then we can reach a unity that's even higher than the unity of just singularity. I would argue with Professor Bloom and the other theories, Descartes chose the path of duality because mind, body, soul, body essentially. the materialists use the concept of unity, but it's not unity, it's singularity. It's seeing only one dimension of reality. Yes, given that the neurons in the mind are different than, let's say, a Lego game, but fundamentally they come from the same reality. Just one is much more sophisticated. What you lose is the sublime elements and the sanctity of life and the dignity of life. Because with that, basically you can dismiss human beings as being no more than just sophisticated machines. Without negating what science has discovered about neuroscience and about the neurons and how the mind works, you come to realize that it's all part of a deeper story. Fine, you have the physical part of the brain, you have the so-called neurology of the brain. You want to put it all into the physical, so be it. But there's also a soul and a spirit. And then there's a place that's beyond all of it, so it's not duality. It all is connected, as I said from Ayin Beis, that conscious wisdom connects to the unconscious connects to the unconscious, which ultimately connects to states of being that are beyond what we understand as being consciousness. And that's when the full seamlessness takes place, the full fusion, the total fusion, the unified field theory, if you wish. So what you take from this, all of this is in our personal lives, we all have our sad moments, we have our cracks, we have our losses. But you can do two things, as I said. You can either lie down and die. You could either just back off and just lick your wounds and then have an experience where you just feel like, you've given up on some of your dreams. You can or take an approach, you're just going to fight and ignore it all. Or you can realize everything has purpose. And just like the broken tablets and the cracked wall can lead to a greater form of unity, which they've done, we can do the same in our own personal lives. That's what the story is. So dissonance is a very interesting and painful experience, perhaps, but you can just decide to just say, accept it, or ignore it, or be pained by it, or you can realize it's part of the divine plan. That Tzimtzum was part of the divine plan. It was not an end in itself, as Hasidic thought makes it very clear. Tzimtzum b'shvil hagilui. What does Tzimtzum b'shvil hagilui mean? That the Tzimtzum is there in order, not as an end in itself. Don't worship the Tzimtzum. It's only there in order to create a deeper revelation. The Tzimtzum is also not kipshute, which means it's not literal. It's only a concealment. And even in the Tzimtzum, you'll find residue, you'll find impressions of the deeper light. So it's a whole different way of looking at life, duality, cracks, and so on. Let me just sum up and conclude. The takeaway message is that as we approach the 17th of Tammuz, which we've been commemorating, and it's a sad, fast day, we remember the crack, but we remember that the crack is a way for new light to enter. Sometimes it takes time. After thousands of years, the time has come that we suddenly see the newer light. And we see the crack as simply an opening. And this is an opportunity in this 3-week period for each of us to look at our own lives, look at those cracks, don't be afraid to, and say, how can I do something to use those as an impetus, as a springboard, to grow as a catalyst. That's why in these 3 weeks we have the custom to add and study Torah, Tziyim b'mishpat tepada v'shaveh b'tzedakah, because it says, Tziyim b'mishpat, Zion, will be redeemed through study, through law. And Shaveh and its captives through charity. Who are the captives and who is what do you need to be redeemed? Because you're talking about galut, you're talking about a displacement, you're talking about dissonance, you're talking about spiritual and psychological out of sorts, a fragmentation, like this parting, like the splitting of the like the breach of the wall and the breaking of the tablets. All for what? That you should come with mishpat and tzedakah to reconnect. The primary reason for this destruction of the second temple, again destruction, was the destruction of people. Sinas chinam, baseless hatred. Oh, you're going to be separate between each other? God says, how could you have a unified home, spiritual home? You can't even get along with each other. So one split leads to the next split. The breach between the people, their distrust and their hatred for each other, ends up creating a breach in the macrocosm. Microcosm, macrocosm. You can't have an unhealthy person in a healthy situation. They will create, it'll breed, it's a breeding ground that spills over. And the temple gets cracked, just like the people were cracked. Was to prepare baseless love, unconditional love, where you connect with each other through charity, through giving to each other, especially these 3 weeks, going out of the way to do things that you would never do for another person, things that you usually would not do. And that's how we correct the breaches. That's how we mend our cracks. You mend them with others, with yourself, within your own self, and you look introspective. This is what this period is about. And we turn the Bein Hamtzarim, the dire straits, between the dire straits of the 3 weeks, of the 17th of Tammuz, till the destruction of the temple on Tisha B'Av, into a redeeming state, where it will be the time when the third temple will be rebuilt. Tisha B'Av, it says, will be the greatest holiday. Why the greatest holiday? Just get rid of Tisha B'Av. What do we need? Because the break brings you to great places, greatest places, unprecedented places you can never come to on your own. Now, nobody wants breaks in their lives. Nobody wants cracks. But once it happens, and it's beyond us, you can reach great heights. And so, under the day, yes, there's a heartbeat, there's a comfort, there's a womb that is protecting us all. We all began completely submerged in the embryonic fluids. But then we're told we have to go out of the womb. We can't stay there. Life means leaving the comfort zone. Just like the soul leaves its comfort zone as it comes down to earth, we leave our comfort zone in the womb and we begin to develop. And then we have to leave our homes. Everything is connected to pain. The first time we go to school, to camp, or later when we get older and we move out of our home, there's a painful element of a certain break. But the break is meant to turn us into independent adults that can learn to connect in new ways, to connect and create unity and fusion even in a fragmented world. So it's a custom to begin to add and study, get in charity in practical ways. Reach out to people, reach out to each other, reach out to strangers, maybe mend ways with people you may have had some type of rupture with, some type of disagreement. Transcend your own pride and do something that goes beyond the regular. Fix something. Mend a breach. That's the call of our times. And when we do that, we mend it within ourselves and it spills over and affects our environment. Just like breaking, something cracks, breeds cracks, mending breeds mending. When one thing is mended, if you ever see, like you begin to thread something and connect it, it becomes easier to connect it as you go along. It's the beginning that's always hard, to catch that place. But once you begin, it comes easier and easier. May we all find ways to mend our own challenges, our own, get beyond our betrayals, our disappointments, and all the different experiences that have splintered us, have hurt us, have broken it into parts, connecting it all to our unified mission statement that transcends it all, that we are here to create a divine home in a fragmented universe. A place where you can find not just unity, but even within the cracks, even show how the cracks are part of the bigger picture. And then in that sense, it's not a duality. It's Hashem Echad, where everything, just different tracks, the mind, the body, the soul, and all the higher levels all come together in one seamless dance and unity. This has been Simon Jacobson, Wednesday night class. And until next Wednesday, 8:15 p.m., everyone have a very blessed week. I will most likely be broadcasting my next class from Moscow, Russia, or from whatever city I'll be in, and bring you warm regards from that. But we'll be here next Wednesday, and thank you again. If you want to send in your email address to us, we'll be happy to send out our weekly newsletter and stay in touch with all our exciting and variety programming at meaningfullife.com. And again, I want to dedicate the class to Yonah Mordechai Jacobson, my new grandson, son of my son, and his wife Dvorah. Everyone be well and have a very pleasant and blessed week.